Hey everyone, welcome back to the table. Haven't been at the table for a while, so I thought I would hop in here. We're going to look at some post-Captain. Sorry for the glare, but depending on how I shift and hold things, looks good. Now, post-Captain is a Napoleonics Age of Sail game, and I want to say I like it. Now, I did a video not too long ago kind of opening it up, and we kind of went over some rules. We talked about some things. And overall, it is actually a really good game. There's a difference between a good game and liking the game. And there are some aspects of the game that prevent this from being like a big winner. So I'm going to go over some things that I would say you would need to play. You got to have a measuring device of some sort. Now, you don't have to have these at all, but I think you need some kind of marker to track hits on ships. Normally, there's not a whole lot of hits happening on ships, maybe 2 or 3, but depending on how your combat goes, if you have several ships and you don't roll all your damage immediately, but you're just rolling for how many hits you have, you might want a way to track it. And so I found that it was kind of fun that some of these splash markers I was using for World War II stuff, larger splashes for larger caliber guns, or I think ultimately I was using these for if it was to designate penetrating or non-penetrating hits, things like that, large caliber, small caliber. But anyway, I found some splash markers. I thought, well, this is fun because when you have your ship, just having something to mark, how many hits and track. That way as you move from ship to ship, then when you go to roll damage, just a little reminder. So I thought that was a recommended thing. And again, your tokens could be anything for that. But and also, you really don't need a whole lot of tokens for the game. So that is one good thing. And then, of course, ships. Now, I'm using the Sails of Glory ships mostly because, one, if you've watched any of my other videos on anything with miniatures, I love assembling, but painting is not my strong point. So these are great because, one, they're 1/1000 scale, and real common rule sets are for 1/1200 and 1/2400, but post-Captain they did include some measuring devices I'll show you that you could print out, and they will work great. They have 1/1000 scales already built. And I think there was one other game I looked at. Now I can't remember what it was, but it was designed for 1/1000 rules too. So it's not a common gaming scale, but you can game in it. And if you have a game that plays in 1/1200, I'll show you a comparison scale for post-Captain with 1/1200. It's not that far off either. So if you had a game set that used 1/1200, you could probably still use the Sails of Glory. You probably wouldn't want to intermix scales. You'd want all your ships to be the one size, but it's possible to do. So you got to have your ships. Another thing that I have found is a nice visual of some sort scale that you can put on the board as a reminder of which way the wind is blowing. A lot of times I've seen people just use dice, or they put like a little piece of paper with an arrow. I'm a visual person, so this I'm taking from Sails of Glory. This is actually used for determining what speed your ship is going based on the angle of the wind, but it is nice just to put on the table, and you have a nice little 3D indicator showing which way the wind is blowing for those particular segments of turns. So you want something to help dictate, or remind people which way the wind is blowing. And then for post-Captain, you're going to have 3 of these. You have your wind gauge. This is your turning indicator, and you have a movement stick. I guess it's a good movement ruler, I guess you could call it that. We'll just talk about these. Also, if you're doing Age of Sail, I would say as a must-have, you got to have cotton to show when these things fire off a broadside. Got to have cotton. Yes, I've played quite a few turns of different Age of Sails games with me and my friend where we just move the ships, roll dice for firing, but there's that visual impact when you don't put the cotton down. It's like, oh, but you got to have cotton. Now, if I was really clever, I would find a way to wire up the lights that blink, like the blinking Christmas lights, small Christmas lights, and put them inside. That way when you lay it down and turn it on, you see the blinking lights. That's a future project. Also for Post Captain, you need 12-sided dice. That was probably louder than I wanted. I collected up a whole bunch from playing General Quarters, and I've got like a whole bunch more in my spare dice box, but I've got some here. I put blue for French, and I was just using yellow. I think yellow I had chosen for British for whatever reason, but I got one here. So far I've only seen that you need like maybe 6 12-sided dice at the most to play, and that just corresponds to your firing. And I also, again, you don't need, but I think is a nice to have, is something to help you track broken masts. Now, my friend, he's actually got in pewter like broken masts counters and things that he's made. I just grabbed some toothpicks, and they clearly aren't as cool as if you had an actual mast or something with sails on it to show that a mast is broke. But I did take a toothpick, and you know, depending on, I played a game with my son where he lost the like top mast on the I forget what they call it. I can't remember. It's in the book something. Anyway, so I just took a toothpick, broke it a little bit, just to kind of signify that he lost just the top part of the mast, not the entire mast. And I just kind of stuck that on the side of the ship, because Post Captain, when you lose a mast, it goes leerward, which I think is the term leerward, and then that just means kind of opposite the way the wind is blowing. So the mast kind of blew this way when it fell off, and then had a little, just a little something visual indicator. So again, a lot of that stuff isn't necessary, but little visual cues and things like that, I think, just add a little bit to the game. And of course, you're going to need some pencils. Now, these gauges are very important because they're going to help you with your broadsides. Now, I've experimented with a couple different things for this game to make it a little bit easier for me to play as a solo player. So that's what I want to talk about, is just my solo gameplay experience, and then we'll do like some solo gameplay for you to see. When you play as a solo gamer, there's a lot for you to track with Post Captain, because normally the game, I think, really excels when it's one ship per person, and you, as you get a lot more experience with the game, you could probably up that to like maybe 2, maybe 3 ships. And it's only, and I'll show you why, but in general, there's not a whole lot of bookkeeping, but some of the bookkeeping it has is very specific on some details, and that could be tedious over time for one person to manage a lot of ships. So if I'm saying that a game of Post Captain, you might have 1 or 2 ships per person, ideally, just for the bookkeeping aspect, as a solo player, then you're mostly doing frigate duels, you know. And I like to play big ships, so Post Captain as a solo player game probably isn't the best if you want to do a lot of ships. And I know there's some easier games out there, but so yeah, anyway, it comes back to this tool. This is actually really easy, very simple. You know, just line it up with the I do everything pretty much from center of mass, the center mast, the main mast, and this will tell you your broadside. And then if you're playing with chase cannons, you can stick that in the front. Now the nice thing is with the Sails of Glory bases, it's got some points here for Sails of Glory, like for the rear firing arcs, the main broadside arc, or just the front, because the rules for Post Captain have the same thing. So I was thinking about just using the little ship information sheet that comes with Sails of Glory, and you could use that in Post Captain too. And because with Post Captain they also have rules for if like your target is 50% obscured or not in a full arc, you can do like partial shooting. And in a way, you could use the arcs already on the ship for that, and that would eliminate the need for this arc here. But again, if you're being a purist to Post Captain, you're probably going to use this here. And it works just fine for noting if a target is in your arc. We use it just fine. I was playing with my son. it works just fine. But again, if you're trying to simplify things, there's already arcs built on here, and it's not too bad. But again, if you're not using Sails of Glory ships, you'll be using this. The turn indicator. This isn't too bad to use either. One thing you'll notice on some of these rulers that you have here, there's F for fast, M for medium, S for slow. So depending on your attitude to the wind, that's going to determine which scale you're using. This thing, I'm going to have to get some WD-40 on there. Oh, God. That is annoying me, so I'm sure that's coming through the camera just fine for all you listening to that creak. Oh, man, it's going to drive me batty. Okay, so what you do to determine your attitude to the wind is when you look at your fancy dancy wind indicator, so you know which way the wind is blowing, and you have your ship. Let's say your ship is at like that to the wind. All you gotta do is you take your indicator. It's got a red side and a green side. Green side means you're going to start by placing it, well, battleship. You place it on the starboard side, and if the wind is coming on the port, is what I used to call it in World War II gaming, but here they call it the larboard side. Larboard? I might not even be pronouncing that correct. But on the port side, you use the red side. And you're going to line up, right here it says bow, so this part is going with the ship, and what you do is, and it can be anywhere along the side of the ship, it really doesn't matter. You just rotate it without rotating the ship until the indicator is, the arrow is matching the direction of wind. And you just look to see which triangle is mostly on the ship. And M for medium or F for fast. And as I'm looking here, it's a little bit more on the fast side and a little bit less on the medium. Like there's more fast touching than the medium is touching. So I would say this is going at fast. It's just, I mean, if it was a little bit more turned, we'd probably be medium speed. But this is just angled enough that we could say, yeah, we'll be fast. Now, if it's in dispute, you go on the slower scale. And of course, when playing with my son, it's always on the faster speed. But it's just this is a very simple way to determine how the wind is affecting you. Now, you use that in comparison with your ship sheet, because this has things like, I didn't want to compare too much to other games, but I probably will, because I don't have a lot of Age of Sail gaming experience. And I'm just going to pull out a couple ship logs here. So when you have, for example, this is actually the, not the Orient, but this was the Imperial. It's also the Francois. I was using that as the Orient. So I've got here my ship log. Let's just zoom in for a second here. Cover some basics of gameplay of post-Captain here. But basically, your ship also has, in addition to the ship log, it has a corresponding ship data sheet. And the ship data sheet has sails listed on it. So depending on if you're doing battle sails, easy sails, or full sail, so it has like three sets of sails that you could be under to determine your forward movement. You just go, battle sails is what's recommended for combat, because you should start to use easy sails and full sails. As you take damage, you could actually further hurt the ship, put extra tension on the rigging, and it makes it easier to have other masts become sprung, which means they're about to break away as well. So battle speed is like the recommended for when you get in and start shooting and start taking damage. So battle is probably what most people will play at once you get into that engagement zone. So that will tell you basically your speed at battle sails. Now you can use backing sails and go slower than that. You can't go over that number there. Well, you can if there's a gust of wind, but we'll explain that later. So unless you're doing like easy sails, you would have a speed of 6, for example, on the Orient, or full sails is a speed of 9. Now for this French ship, it's saying that even with all its battle sails out, it has a speed of 4. And it's got movement points inside each sail, so if you add all that up to the corresponding color, then you know that's your speed. That's important because if you take some damage and lose a mast, like when I played with my son, he lost the top forward mast, and he would lose half of speed on his movement factor because he's not catching all that wind. However, that's blue, which would count towards easy sail, so if he's going at battle sail, no problem. Lose some of that. He was still going at whatever speed the Victory had, which was like a 6. It's incredibly fast compared to this French ship. But you're going to take those three numbers and you put them on your log. So here's the Orient, 4, 6, 9, and we just know that we're hanging out in battle speed. And as you go, the turns for Post Captain are broken down into 3 phases. Now, this is where some things start to go maybe a little more bookkeeping-y than, say, other games. Now, the only other games I've played is Wooden Ships and Iron Men, which has similar concepts, but does things a lot differently. And I've also played my friend's Homebrew, which is the sailing rules from Heart of Oak and the gunnery rules of Wooden Ships and Iron Men, and played just a little bit of Wooden Ships and Iron Men vanilla, no mods to it. But the difference is those games you play out as a single turn, and so when you're plotting your movement, you're plotting movement for the entire turn. So you're looking ahead as when you change the facing of your ship, you still have movement points left over, so now the new facing of the ship after you turn it will be affected by its facing into the wind or away from the wind, and so you have to kind of plot ahead what you want to do with your ship. Wooden Ships and Iron Men is pretty simple. If you use the hexagon system, it works great. It's fine. If you use the sailing rules for Heart of Oak, it's a little more complicated, but it has a lot of sailing nuances in there, beyond Post Captain even. But you're still plotting ahead for the entire turn, and you have to mid-turn stop and do some math, like, well, okay, I'm turning 2 points into the wind, now I need to recalculate my speed at that point. But what Post Captain does here, which is actually kind of nice, is it breaks the turn down into 3 phases. So you have a red phase, white phase, and a blue phase. And so what you only have to do is plot out your movement for 1 phase at a time. So it takes that 1 turn and it takes your having to plot out an entire turn of movement and just breaks it down into 3 phases. That's actually very helpful. Maybe that was coming across as a negative bookkeeping thing, but it's actually really, really beneficial. So what that means is at the beginning of a phase, I might check my attitude towards the wind in case I did make a turn or something like that. That would then tell me if I'm going at the slow, medium, or fast, and based on how many movement factors I want to spend. So for example, here what I've got plotted out was, for whatever reason, when I started this turn and I started this phase, I only went for 3 movement instead of the 4 that I could do. I just applied some backing sails and was going at a 3. Unless, like if you plot in here a 4, you're going to move 4. Your ship is caught up in the wind and it's moving 4 movement segments, whatever that turns out to be. So you've got to that's probably just the biggest decision you have to make is, based on how my ship is positioned against the wind, am I going to use all my movement factors or just some, right? Just depending on how you're trying to outmaneuver your opponent. So really, that's as complicated as it gets. You take your wind indicator, tells you if you're going fast, medium, or slow, how many movement factors do you want to spend based on that, and then you move your ship. And then once everybody has finished, now there's no pre-plotting of movement. That's one other thing. There's not a whole lot of room here to pre-plot movement, and you don't in this game. With the other games, that's fine, and you're pre-plotting based, guessing what you think your opponent will do. That's cool, and you're plotting out an entire turn. And so sometimes that might not be fun for some folks. And again, Post Captain just does it a little different. So you're going to have your ship, and once you've determined how you want, how many movement points you're going to spend, are you on a medium speed? Let's just say I was doing 3 movement segments, and I'm going to be using the medium because of the way my ship is facing the wind. Well, in post-captain, you're going to roll initiative. So there is a rule where if your ships are very far apart, then the ships that are caught by the wind first have initiative because the wind is blowing against them first. And so they would move according to how many movement points you've plotted. So there's still no pre-plotting of move forward 2, turn 1, move forward 1, nothing like that. You just have how many movement points you want to do. And then when it's your turn to move, you have to decide, am I turning or just going to go straight? And if you're going to turn, then you have your turn gauge. And one thing is the blue you see here. This is, I call it a free turn, but essentially your ships, because they are large and cumbersome and they have to overcome inertia, if you want to turn more segments than what's listed here in blue, then your ship has to travel, depending on the size of your ship, a certain amount of movement segments forward before the rudders are cutting into the ocean, and your ship will actually start to turn because you've broke the inertia of moving forward. But if it's in blue on your particular speed scale, you can turn that. That still costs you movement points, but you don't have to move forward first in order to break the inertia effect. But let's say if I was wanting to, say, turn 3 of these segments, then I would have to move forward 2, and then I could begin to turn my 3. The thing is, with this particular ship, the Orient, at battle sails, most of its moves are 4. I'm doing very few turns. There's not much turning that I can do and then still have movement points to move forward and maneuver. So this is not a very maneuverable ship. And that was probably one of the concerns that I had after playing like Heart of Oak. Heart of Oak, when you do the sailing rules for that, there are a lot of factors. There's some crew factors. There's a lot of the wind setting at the start of the game plays a lot in how far your ship can move, like the wind strength, the sails that you're using. There's also even the quality of the ship itself. And so there's like 3 or 4 things that go into determining how maneuverable your ship is. It's very detailed. And so you're going to have, you might have French and British ships facing each other, and they both might be frigates, but depending on the quality of the frigate and the quality of the crew, there could be a lot of differences between how the 2 ships maneuver. Here, it doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot of differences, only just driven by the ship sheet here and how many sails you have. There's nothing that says, well, I've got a lower quality ship. It's just how many wind sails do I have, that number right there. And with the Victory, they have 6. So now that could be the game's way of taking into the difference in quality between the types of ships. So even though they might have the same number of sails, but the way that they assign points to the sails might be trying to say, yeah, British ships were more maneuverable, therefore they get more movement points even though it's the same number of sails. Their sails are, that's just a generic way of marking the ship quality. So with the French, yeah, not very maneuverable. So I did a lot of just the free moving where I could just kind of turn, rotate, and then that was a move and a half, and then I might have just a couple move points left over that I could do. So I just match up the move marker to the back of the ship, or like if you're starting here on the medium, I just kind of line it up and then move forward however many movement points I had, like even if it's 2 or 3. So 1, 2, maybe I had 3 movement points left over. And you move 3. So the ships don't move very far. And again, just none of what I'm talking about I planned. All right, I'm just talking to you. So with this, I was worried about the scale. So my friend, he does play in 1/1200, and the ships are noticeably small. Not like super small, but the scale for post-captain, because they use, this company, the Old Dominion Game Works, they use what they call like true scale. So they have things scaled down even into the movement sticks. And so if I just raise this up a minute, sorry for the wobbly camera. I wish Wish I could afford a better arm for that, one that didn't wiggle so much when I move it. Okay, so here is the 1/1000 scale measuring stick for speed, and here's a 1/1200. Let's just pop that up a little bit more. There we go. Now, if I'm comparing fast to fast, you can see here that there's a little bit of a gap. That's just over an inch for one move segment if your ship was in the fast wind speed. And under the 1/1200, it's actually just under an inch for the fast for one move segment. So again, there's not a whole lot of difference in the scales, but it was like, well, when I'm on the table, I was afraid that this would always feel like ships were just zooming across the map. But in actuality, when we're playing on the table, like if you take the Victory, let's grab the Victory, and if it's on fast and it moves 7, it does look like it's moving quite a bit here on the table. To see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's 7. That's a little bit of a move there. And then if you're playing on 1/1200 scale, well, the same thing, it doesn't quite move as far as the 1/1000, but in actuality, that's not a whole lot of movement when you actually are playing on a 6x4 table. So even with true scale and 1/1000 ships, you can actually still get quite a bit of action on even a 6x4 table. You don't have to have a very large table to do Napoleonic's Age of Sail gaming, which is nice. Also, when you're doing your distances for shooting, that's another thing we'll talk about is the shooting charts. You still need your ships very close to have any real effective firing. They're not going to be clear across the table. I think the gunnery chart, you could be out to like 70 inches away, but you're not hitting anything at that range. You might, if you're a super good dice roller and you're very lucky, there might be a hit, but most of your shots, no, they're not happening that far out. You're still going to be very close. And so these scales and distances that you mean, everything is moving relatively the same speed to each other. You're all using the same measuring sticks. So I have found that even with 1/1000 scale ships, using the 1/1000 scale tools that you have, you still don't need a very large gaming area. So that's great. So you've got your ships there, using your tools to maneuver, and then, but it's the same thing here. Once you determine if you're fast, medium, or slow. So like if I was on fast, I could turn one segment for free before I would have to move forward 2 move segments on the measuring stick before I could turn again. But if I wanted to start out by turning 3 points, I'd have to move forward 2 and then turn my 3 segments. So the Victory is pretty nimble. It can do something like that. The Orient, unless you're going at higher sails, it's not very nimble at all. Alright, I know that all seems very rambly. I apologize. But I was just very excited to share a few things. I really only wanted to talk about a few things, but you know, it's not my style to just talk about a few things. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff apparently. Now, on this ship record though, this is actually very cool too with the gunnery. So after you fire, and when we were playing Wooden Ships and Iron Men, it felt like I could fire every single turn. Just firing every turn at each other. Alright, that's cool. Here with Post Captain, because your turn is broken down into 3 phases, you can actually now track how long it takes to reload a broadside. And that's done by nationality. The British, they take 2 phases to reload. French take 3 phases. So when you fire, you just mark the next few phases after the phase you fire. So on this here track I'm looking, I think my son, his handwriting is worse than mine. I think he was writing on this one. But he fired on the red phase of turn 2, well, he fired on the blue phase of turn 1 off his larboard, not lard, lardbird? I was thinking lardbird. They got larboard. I'm used to port from playing General Quarters, so larboard is not a phrase my mouth is quite used to pronouncing properly. Alright, and then he marked off 2 phases for reloading that broadside, and he couldn't fire in that time, but he'd be ready to go again on phase, the next blue phase or later that comes up. So there is actually some segments of maneuvering where you're not shooting at each other because your broadsides have to reload. And that actually felt good. That felt great. As compared to wooden ships and Iron Men, it was like, well, you fired and now you'll be able to fire again next turn. There was really no sense of time or the need for, you know, crew skill that to affect reloading. You were just firing every single turn. Here, there's a little bit of a gap in reload. So with the French taking 3 phases, you could still say that the British could outgun the French because they could fire more often over a long extended period of time. Whereas in like wooden ships and Iron Men, everybody was just firing every turn, so it really didn't matter. It didn't care if it was British or French or anything like that. We're just always shooting at each other. So this actually, you had to plan out a little bit better. When are you getting in, and then when you try to pull away, so that you're, you know, lessening the impact of the enemy shooting at you while you reload. Or are you going to try to wear or possibly tack? By the time you get done finishing a full tack, your broadside probably reloaded, because that was something too that there's another game, but sometimes we do that. Oh, I do that in video games where those actually have long reload times. So as I'm reloading a broadside, I'm trying to flip my ship around to bring the other broadside to bear. That way you're always kind of going back and forth. But you can't really do that in wooden ships and Iron Men. And you can do that to some extent with like the French, because they take 3 phases to reload. You might not tack in that time, but you could probably start to wear, and depending on how you catch your opponent, you could unload broadside, both broadsides. With the British reloading rather quickly though, they pretty much just need to maneuver that and keep that one broadside on the enemy until they start taking damage and losing the cannons on a broadside. Then they might want to switch over. But anyway, just different things that you can do based on the fact that your one turn is broken down into several phases. And you have to track the starboard gunnery and the larboard gunnery. There's also a place in here to track repairs that you might do and some extended tasks. So they got things, part of repairs, but there's also like getting underway. If you're starting the game where your ship was in anchor, you might have to do an extended task to prepare the ship to like raise anchor, get the sails ready, then take off. So there's not very detailed record keeping that you need here, which is fine. But this is where I originally wanted to talk about the game as far as a pain as a solo player. All of this stuff up here, just fine as far as a solo player goes. You've got your basic tools for measuring your movement. You got easy to track it here, your movement points, and then you're free to move your ship just in the initiative order that you roll when you're engaged in the tactical battle aspect of it. So easy for the solo player. Great. Thumbs up. I remember the original point of this video now. The pain as a solo player. So really everything I've talked about up to that point, absolutely no problem as a solo player. This part is where it starts to suck as a solo player. So everything up to this point, you can easily do several ships. You can do 3 ships under your command, easy peasy. Here's my speed, here's the wind gauge I'm using, or the movement, you know, fast, medium, no problem. You're moving ships, you're firing, you're reloading. Great. This part, crew management. This is the part of the game that bogs down to where a lot of people would recommend that you do 1 ship per person. You need a calculator. I need a calculator. I'm not good with fractions, so I'll admit. I had my son get his calculator out so we could keep track of stuff as we were playing and taking casualties and losing cannons and stuff. Mostly it's to track who gets to operate the guns. So on your ship form, you have your crew here, and there are some in green underlined. Those are the minimum people needed to run the ship as far as all the sails and things like that. So with the Victory, they had 2, and the Orient, it's 3. So you're going to put 3 right there. So that means you have, out of say the 31 people, I forget what this had. I think this has 31. The Orient had 31 crew factors, and then each crew factor is like 10 men or something like that. So these are groups of men that you have here. So there's like 30 men that run the basic sailing duties of the ship. And there can be more depending on things that you do, but 30 just keep it running at battle cells and you're fine. Everybody else is going to be running guns. Then, on the ship form, each of these boxes represents approximately 3 guns. And each of those need a gun crew to operate. Now, with this rule, the way the rules for post-captain are written is you can say you start the game with everything loaded. They're ready to fight, right? You're coming in to fight. And so your gun crews can fire both broadsides in a phase because it doesn't take a full crew to light the cannon and fire them. But your gun crews can only reload 1 broadside at a time because all those men are then used to pull the cannons back, load in the cannonball, and do all that stuff. I guess it takes a lot of manpower to handle a cannon on one of these ships. I've never done that before, so I can't confirm or deny. But you can only reload 1 broadside on a phase. So if I fired my larboard and my starboard guns, I would have to, before I could reload my larboard, I might want to reload the starboard. So I'd have to mark off the phases of reloading those. Once that's done, I would mark off the phases for reloading my larboard side guns. Okay, that's fine. Still, that's not the tedious part. The calculating of how many crew factors it takes to do all of that, that's the part where the math gets a pain. So right down here they have this handy dandy chart. So for your 32 to 42 pounder guns, it takes 1 3/4 crew factor. For your 24 to 30 pounder guns, it takes 1 1/2 crew factors. Then for the 12 to 18 pounder guns, it's 1 1/4. And then for your 8 to 9 pounder guns, it's 1. And then for the light guns, the little itty bitty stuff, which 8 pounders you could argue would be light guns too, but if you did have some designated 6 pounder light guns, that takes half a crew. So what you had to do, since you can only really reload 1 side at a time, you got to count your boxes here. Now the size of the box corresponds to the size of the gun. So these big boxes are 36ers. The middle of the deck, or the middle deck here, because this is a 3-decker, is your 24-pound guns. And then the top deck, not the top, but you know, this 3rd deck here, I guess, first one down. Anyway, that'd be the 12-pounders. Now, this was an interesting fact. I didn't know until I read the rules. The larger caliber guns were kept on the very bottom to help the ships from being top heavy. So the higher up the ship you go, the lighter the cannon sizes. I did not know that. And so this game is simulation-y in that aspect. So my larger guns are down here on the bottom. Anywho, so I would have to calculate. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 12-pounder guns on that top deck. So that would mean 6 times 1 1/4. And I would write down here that is 7.5. Then for the middle area, those are the 24-pound guns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and those are 1 1/2. So 6 times 1 1/2, I think it was like 7.5. I could be wrong on the math, but that sounded about right. And then on the lower decks with my heavy guns, the 36-pounders, those need 1 3/4. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times 1 3/4. That came out to 8.75 crew factors. And then my light guns, because again I can only do one side, those are my 8-pounders. Those are light guns because they're red here. So since those only needed half, well, I guess technically this says it needed 8-pounders needed 1 crew person. So I guess I should have actually put down 2 here for light guns. Oh, I got a pencil here. So you add that up to, Oh, I was looking at the Orient and following along on the Victory sidetrack. Oops, my mistake. But just to show you some of the math here, let's do it on the Orient. That's why some of those numbers didn't look right. Okay, so with the Orient, it's got 34 crew total. The lower guns need 8.75 crew factors. The middle guns needed 9 crew factors. The upper guns needed 7.5 crew factors. And the light guns, because they're caliber size of 8, need 2. And I would then have, that was 29.75 crew factors to sail the ship and operate the weaponry, which left me just a few crew factors left over that were not assigned. So the French carried a lot of people. That's great. They can absorb crew casualties. Whereas with the Victory, after doing all that math, now these numbers might be off a little bit because as we played, like we did some damage and stuff, but the general gist is the Orient had enough people, it felt like, to operate everything. But the Victory, on the other hand, did not have enough people to operate everything from the get-go. I think once I had added up all the light guns and stuff, they were actually undermanned. And so my son had to say, well, I guess I won't operate one of my light guns when we go fighting or something like that. Now, that's interesting. Again, side note, because I've watched some YouTubes as I become a better historian. I've heard that some, like the Spanish and French typically had enough people to crew their ships. They just weren't quite as well trained. And that could be a very broad overgeneralization of things, so I apologize if that's, really oversimplifying the reality. But what I heard is that the British had fewer sailors available. Like, they had lots of ships, but not as many sailors to go around. Therefore, they tended to overtrain their crews to kind of compensate for that. So again, that might be an oversimplification, but that's one reason they did a lot of press gangs and things like that, which was one of the grievances of the War of 1812, which I think I heard on something, because they were kidnapping a lot of American sailors to force them to sail on British ships, is the gist I got out of that. But again, I could be wrong. But anyhow, so that's kind of simulated here. And that's why you got to track your crew. It's your precious, precious crew. Because as you start to lose crew members, you then have to start to track who's manning what. So as you play the game, and the game doesn't really specify, are you losing crew off of your low guns, mid guns, or upper guns, or your light guns? It just says you took like a crew hit. So as I mark off a crew, like if I just boop, boop, took a crew hit, I then have to come in here and go, well, where am I taking it off of? With the Orient, because I've got some excess folks to begin with, I could easily absorb that. Like, oh yeah, no problem. I got people that were just sitting around. I got some guys in the kitchen that weren't doing anything. So I'll just reduce my surplus crew. But once you start to lose the surplus and you lose a crew factor, then it's like, okay, well, if I lost a crew factor off my upper guns, I lost 1. I only have 6.5. Now I have to refigure out exactly, I know that that's less than I need to run all of these. So it's like I have to make a little note and say, like, maybe a circle / going, that's a no-go. Because of the lack of crew, I'm not going to fire that gun. Actually, I'd want to keep those big ones going, right? So I might be like, okay, I'm gonna take some crew that were operating guns on the upper deck. So I won't be using one of these anymore because I want to make sure I have enough men to keep my big guns going. This is the part that becomes tedious for a single player person. It might not seem like a big deal on paper as I'm talking to you about it, but when you're trying to run, as a solo player, several ships and you take a crew hit, or in the case of a gun hit, because that happened to my, we were destroying guns in whole, like that was pretty easy. Well, as soon as I destroy a gun, now I got to subtract, okay, I lost a 12-pounder, I got to subtract 1 1/4 from my upper deck, and now I got to put that down into my surplus. Again, that's not too bad in theory, but in actual play as a solo player, that really sucks to be that tedious with the math, and you just want to be rolling dice. Now you might say, well, how does that compare to, say, like Wooden Ships and Iron Men? Well, Wooden Ships and Iron Men has crew. You track crew. But when you take like crew hits, it's once you have a certain amount of crew hits, there's simply just like an overall penalty to, say, gunnery. And the way that the gunnery works in, say, Wooden Ships and Iron Men compared to this is that they don't care about the actual calibers of the guns that you have. Like, they don't care how many 36 guns you have, how many 24. What they do is they have basically an equivalency number. It's called a gun factor chart. So when you look at, say, like the Orient, it might say that by adding all this volume of firepower together, you have maybe 20 gun factors coming off of this ship. And it's got a little section where it tracks how many gun boxes you have. So this also has gun boxes, but this is where a little more on the simulation-y side, where it worries that you have 36 pounds, 24 pounds. So with Wooden Ships and Iron Men, yes, you're still tracking crew loss. And the same thing with rigging. Once you take a certain amount of rigging hits, that will affect your speed. And then you also got to make a roll to see if you like broke a mast or something like that. Here, rigging is also tracked a lot, because as you take some rigging hits, which are up here, and the thing is, it's the same for all the ships. Like, there's 10 rigging boxes for every ship in the game, and the first 3 are free. You can take 3 rigging hits, nothing happens to the ship. But once you start taking the 4th, you got some rolls to make to see if mast becomes sprung, and if the mast gets sprung at some point, you got to make checks to see if it actually breaks. And the thing is, as detailed as that is, it doesn't matter what kind of ship it is. They all have 10 rigging boxes. Whereas with Wooden Ships and Iron Men, your ships have rigging boxes based on the type of ship that it is. So a bigger ship, more rigging. Smaller ship, less rigging. Here it doesn't matter. So it's just interesting to see how 2 games approach the same thing, but slightly different. I would have liked to have seen a little more rigging detailed as far as that goes, because I would think a larger ship could suffer rigging hits better. I could be wrong. Again, never sailed in one to know. And then a smaller ship would be more affected by rigging hits. But here it doesn't matter the size of the ship. They all get 10 rigging boxes. But again, the tediousness of it is mostly right down in here. So for all the detail that you have on the ship forms, all of this is very easy to do. It's great visual indicators for what's happening to your ship. So if you play like General Quarters, it's really not that different from what you have there. The crew, because I don't even remember really having to monitor crew losses in General Quarters the way you do here. But here, yeah, that's the tedious part. Okay, so here comes the part of video where it's like, okay, we took 47 minutes to get to that. Yeah, we did. Thanks for watching, by the way. So I really don't know what to do to simplify tracking crew as far as making this not a tedious process for me as a solo player. Because when I play post-captain, I want to play the game as close to the rules as possible, but this one thing kind of really sucks. I did see a post, and I don't remember where I saw the post, but people have discussed this before. And what they did was they simplified crews, and I don't remember exactly what they did, but they did something similar to where they just rounded it. So like 1 3/4, they said, well, we'll make that 2. 1 1/2, we can make that 2 as well. The 1 1/4, we'll leave that at 1. So it drops it a little bit. You could probably even make 1 1/2 a 1, or even leave that at 1.5. That wouldn't be too much on the math. It's when you start doing 3/4, quarters, and things like that. And you know, maybe you could leave the 4 to 6 pounders at half a crew factor. But they rounded. There were some of these numbers that they just kind of reworked, so they were even and not fractions. And that seemed like that would help a little bit. But again, it probably the math doesn't add up to exactly the crew factors you have. So that's kind of my biggest thing right here is this game would work and play just fine and be a really good, enjoyable solo game if I could work a better way to track the crew assignment. The basic concepts of the game I just kind of explained and chit-chatted about over the last 50 minutes with the moving and stuff like that. That is all fine. I got no problem with that. But the crew assignments, that's the part of the game that makes it not fun at all. And if I could fix that aspect of the game, no problem. Be more than happy to play. And I'll probably, like I said, I'll go ahead and play like a little sample game. Not on this recording, right? I'm not going to splice these two together because this is pretty lengthy in itself, just talking about the basics of the rules and then getting to this point here. But yeah, and that was something else I was thinking, like how I could make the game less tedious. But it really isn't too bad at all. Because see, I was thinking if I use my Sails of Glory stuff, because the ship data already has a spot in here for how your ship is affected by the wind as far as speed goes, because it has green, orange, and red. You know, red if you're going to be in irons, you know, and then orange if it's coming on the side, you know, or if you're running if it's in the green. So it had that, and I thought I could use that with Post Captain as well, but nah. Everything about the game that I've tried to change is actually, it works just fine with the tools included, except this part right here. Once I can get a good crew assignment system down, I think the game will be easier to run as a solo player. I don't have to do as much math. I can just simply look and go, oh, I lost 2 crew. Boom, I'll take them off here, and I know that I'm down shooting a couple of guns. And then if I lose some guns, I can reassign crew back to wherever I want. That'll be a lot easier. As it stands with the 3/4 halves and quarters, it just, if you're only running one ship, not a problem. But again, a solo player trying to run multiple ships, yeah, that just kills it for me. Alright, anyway, that's my long discussion on Post Captain. I hope maybe that sheds some light on the game system for you if you're not too familiar with it. If you have tips on managing crew, maybe I would just scratch that all together and say, kind of do like the wooden ships in Iron Man. As you cross off one entire section, there's some kind of gunnery penalty. You know, boom. Maybe it's a shift up in your gunnery. But again, that really goes against kind of the simulation aspect of it. But yeah, I could think of something. So anyway, that's where I'm at on that. Hey, thanks for watching. If you watched all this, whew, kudos to you. You know I like to talk, so I appreciate you taking the time to watch the whole video. If you didn't watch the whole video, I understand. Anyway, take care. Bye.